And we're running. Great. So today I would like to just conduct a brief rambling through some things that have been on my mind recently. And perhaps this is something that will be useful for others to hear. Uh, I hope so. That is at least my intent with doing some of these videos, of which I'll probably do more in the foreseeable future. So, something that has really been dawning on me lately, quite significantly so, is the notion that we don't really live, we as humanity don't any longer live as we're supposed to. We don't, we're not in contact with our true nature. We have lost that contact, and it has been lost as a result of the development of the um, advancement of culture, of the cultural machine that has severed the cord to Mother Earth that once bound us to who we truly were and who we still truly are, but we've just suppressed that. It's still latent within us, but it has been numbed, it has been castrated, you might say. The dog has had its balls tied up, and I'm here to voice my concerns with this about this situation. What I think we might, what I think might be the intent behind its happening, and how we might sort of remedy it. I think it's something that requires remedy, and it requires one quickly, because I don't think we have much time left. So, what really happened? What went wrong? Because it seemed perhaps before that I equated the rise of human culture with the abandonment of our true nature, and thus made it appear to be something bad. I don't think, just first of all, I don't think culture is in and of itself is something that must necessarily be avoided or counterworked. However, I rather think that it's the wrong kind of cultural development that has taken place, and that has led us to this unfortunate point in history. Writing systems, technology, and so forth. And so I think those are great inventions. I think those have served us well. However, we have also forsaken aspects of our true relationship with reality. You see this manifest in this modern notion that the universe is just one giant machine, and we are all just machines, blah, 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 like carrying out algorithms that are completely regardless of the actual content of your person. We see ourselves as well, even though most people still see themselves as agents in the world, and everyone in order to act must actually do so. This kind of philosophical dogma that dictates that we are all just machines has unfortunately seized onto the minds of some perhaps not too bright individuals. I don't know. I don't think you're too bright if you actually think you're a machine, because obviously the way in which you interact with reality is not mechanistic, and everyone should be able to know that. And I think everyone deep down inside, whether they care about philosophy or not, knows that. I think rather the problem is that some of these allegedly smart people, at least they brand themselves as being smart, have made us believe that we are somehow these machines, and they're sort of, since they are the self-proclaimed smart ones, perhaps a more common, ordinary guy, girl might not might feel inclined, therefore, to just gulp down what they say without really conducting any critical analysis of it, perhaps because they don't have the mental horsepower to do so. However, I think they've got it all wrong, these very materialistic, scientistic individuals. I think they don't really get what reality is about. First of all, humans are not machines. Nothing in the universe can be a machine unto itself. That's the whole problem of consciousness. Consciousness is not mechanistic. A machine is something that is put together, and each and every part works on the other part, and if you remove one of the parts, well, then the machine collapses. However, that is obviously not the case. Consciousness remains constant unto itself, as itself, no matter what you do to it. You can, in other words, not break consciousness down. You cannot, you can, of course, divide it into smaller parts of the world, but it's not the brain itself. If you do something to it, if you debilitate it in some way, does not cause conscious experience itself to collapse or be diminished in its quality, maybe in its quantitative reach into the world. Like the again, like brain power is a certain, like, does play a role in how consciousness may unfold within the physical universe, but consciousness itself does not act. It is not a composition of many parts acting on each other. It's one unified experience, one whole. And this whole is not broken by intoxication, by dropping acid. I remember this brilliant quote from Sam Harris, who sort of, even though he's the typical materialist, was musing on the very strange oddities of consciousness and the fact that even though you can bombard the nervous system with all these stimulative inputs, consciousness itself, the conscious self behind all that, remains constant. Throughout the flux of brain activity whirling around in its internal sphere, mind itself, self as it is, sits back and just watches, and it's never broken. It's never disrupted. It's constant unto itself, eternally, it seems. Self does not undergo the same permutations as brain activity. And there's also another thing, that self is actually that which orients, which directs, which controls brain activity. You can direct your thinking in certain directions, and you actually do that as a conscious individual, as an agent, again, let us just quickly define agentivity, like in a phrase. It's the ability to be able to cause yourself to move or to act. Like, it's a self-causality, it's a loop that ties back to itself, and it just keeps going. There's nothing external that pushes on it. It can use things in the external world as motives for its motion, but it has to cause itself to select those motives. Just having a reason to do something does not mean that reason was all that swayed on you to do it. You actually, as a self, have to pick something. You have to self-actuate yourself into movement. That's why when you sit there and you're hungry, your body doesn't just get up and just stop moving. However, we do have some states, of course, in which the body can move autonomously. So somnambulism, like sleepwalking, is a phenomenon in which the bodily organism is able to just get up and move around, and the conscious self is deep at rest in the dream world and is not in action of the body or in control of the body's action in that during that time. However, this is sort of the exception to the rule, and just proves that even though the body runs some algorithms, the self cannot be another algorithm. And I think a reason why this must be the case, inevitably so, is that I think it's Gödel's theorem that says that if you have a set of axioms, you cannot generate new axioms with that. A machine is non-generative, is the bottom line, meaning that machines do not innovate, they do not generate new forms of reality. However, since reality must come from a complete state of utter simplicity, of ontic simplicity, in order for there to be all the complexity that we perceive around us in the world, of course, like my nails are different from my eyes, for instance, like that's very commonsensical. That's not something you really have to argue. In order for this complexity to be present at all, reality must be generative from a state of simplicity into complexity, multiplexity. And this it must do by distributing a unifying syntax over everything that binds it together in the same reality. Reality must be one. one only. And this is the case because the identity of reality is to be real. So anything that is real must be included within this circle of realness. You cannot have any other circles outside the circle. You might say, can I have circles inside the circle? Yeah, exactly. That's what your mind would be. Your mind would be a circle within the circle of reality, and God would then be the identity. Like I said it, G-O-D, God would then be the big circle that ties all of these smaller circles of self-centered minds, cognitive functioning, processing of perceptual input and output back into the external world, must be encapsulated within the workings of one ultimate identity of reality. This is reality. It bears the philosophical name of God. There's no other meaningful term you can apply to this being. This is a metaphysical being, since the physical universe does not contain the explanation for the ontological description of this being. It cannot describe this being. This being is actually what describes itself through the physical universe and the laws that govern it, so forth and so on. It must inform itself about what it is, and therefore it generates a vehicle for that self-knowledge to unfold, and this vehicle is the physical universe. So God is a metaphysical being that must generate himself from a realm of unbound potential, according to the CTMU, and I agree, it's the only way you can have a self-generative reality, model of reality. And in order to do so, he produces a physical vehicle for that self-knowledge, and that is a coupling of content and form, of state and syntax. And then you find a self in that, binding an internal cognitive world together with an external informational world. So there's the kind of information transduction going on between the two worlds, and the self is then tying all of that together. So you can sort of see it as an equation, if you would like. On the one side of the equation, you have sort of like a parenthesis of state and syntax that gives physics, that gives form to reality, binding content into a form so that it has this kind of restriction. Otherwise, where would you even find the borders to anything? That's the problem, as Aristotle pointed out, with material being the ultimate identity of reality, because material without form is really like, it's undefined. It must be defined, it must be constrained. So on this side of the equation, you have form, content, the same you have on the other side, and then you have the equation mark, which is actually a circle binding those two together. That's the self. However, the self is not a part of that information plus form, that coupling. Because it doesn't contain any form. It's that which binds those two realms together, the internal cognitive realm with the external informational realm, so that you have an infocognitive monism that is tied together by a self. This self is generative. It can generate new forms of reality. I can take this cup, I can smash it, I can paint on it, I can do things with it. I can actually innovate this particular coupling of content and form, like the content being the molecules, which themselves are actually couplings of content and form in the form of atoms that get coupled according to a chemical syntax to bind into molecules, but the atoms themselves are even also couplings of form and content. You have the content of the electrons, the protons, the neutrons, bound together via some kind of mathematical syntax that dictates, ordains how they may combine to form molecules, to form the chemical components of this kind of table of the periodic table of elements. So everything in the world is a coupling of content and form, what Aristotle would have called hylomorphism, which just means material form. It's the kind of form that material is put into. However, the mind itself, or the self, that is, because mind is just world, and it's just take mind and reality, equate them. And self is then that which operates in that and binds this cognitive world together with the external informational world. And we are in the middle of that, and we actually carry out a meaningful process on behalf of God himself, who's then binding all of reality together at the same time, so we can all interact in the same reality. Because if you are the problem is that if you are a fundamental, irreducible, metaphysical entity of reality, then it should only makes sense that you generate your own reality. But if you do that, then how come you interact with all these other metaphysically irreducible entities of self? that can only be explained if they're all subsumed under one unifying ontic identity, whom they resemble. So we ourselves, we are agents. We are causing for reality to assume new forms, and this is what is shown in quantum mechanics when you make an observation, a registration of a certain quantum event. That event goes from being in a state of a superposition into a particular form. Reality chooses its own form depending on which kind of question you pose to it. You must ask reality, where are you? And if you ask it, depending on how you phrase that question, reality will give you a particular answer. You are participating in the emergence of information in reality. You're co-creating reality alongside with God, and you have therefore a very intrinsically meaningful identity in this whole network. And this also means that you will extend beyond your body, by the way. You are not tied to this limited physical body. You are metaphysically irreducible if it be your wish. However, how must you then ensure that metaphysical everlastingness, that eternality? Because God is eternal. If God weren't eternal, then there would be no reality, there would be no universe, because if there were nothing before the Big Bang, then there were nothing to generate the Big Bang. Then you might say, well, we just have an infinite circles of ionic universes just extending infinitely back in time. However, if you have like this current ion you're in right now, call it zero, and if you keep going back in time, either to like, I don't know which direction will fit you actually. I think it's this one, yeah. You will say -1, -2 of these ions that are supposedly trailing back from this current one. And however, the problem will be that if you go back to infinity, how did you ever get to this zero? How can you count down from minus infinity of these? If there weren't a first ion, how can there be one now? Because how could we ever get to this one now? Because we will never even reach the one that began. So how can you ever get past, in a sense, how could you ever get to this one if there is an infinite amount of them extending back in time? That's the problem. Like, there must have been a beginning to the universe. This means that there must have been a state prior to the universe. This state could not have been physical, because the beginning of the universe is actually in the inception of the laws of physics. This means that there must be a metaphysical state of affairs prior to the emergence or the origination of the physical universe. And this metaphysical state is, it's a kind of theological realm, you might call it. It's the realm where reality extends into what it ultimately is, in its most primitive state, and then it generates itself from there, and we are carrying on that process in that image of that state. We are existing right now in an internal state of reality from which it generates itself eternally, incessantly, without end. And if you wish to do this with God forever, he will allow you, but you have to do it according to his terms. So he's working to self-maximize, self-optimize. He wants to generate himself into his most into his fullest form possible, and you must participate in that. You must cooperate with him in that. If you go against the flow of being and you start to become detrimental, you start acting like a virus on being, like a parasite, you will get metaphysically erased, deleted by God. He will take his computer, he will write you off, and you will become nothingness in the end. You might be able to cohere in this body right now because you have a kind of cognitive system, a physiological system that binds you into a certain form, but when you leave this form, you have nothing but God to bind you together. And if you have severed your cord to God, he can't hear you. There's no connection. You can yell his name, you can shout on him to come and save you from your own mess, but he can't hear you anymore. He doesn't care. He's not like the Christian God who would love everyone, even the most depraved sinner. If you don't care about reality, why should reality care about you? So that's the kind of fix you're in if you make such kinds of decisions. However, how does all of this tie to nature and forsaking nature? I think it ties back to it because there's long been this view in anthropology that polytheism was the you might call the outset stage of religious ideation among humans. So we went from being perhaps animistic and so forth into being polytheistic, into being henotheistic, like choosing one god and then out of this pantheon and then selecting that above the others and praying to that, worshipping that to a greater extent, and then finally monotheism. However, recent, or at least throughout the 20th century, findings in anthropology have shown that actually this is wrong, that the primordial state of religious ideation is monotheistic. There is one ultimate identity of reality that is mental, that is language based. They found this in among North American Indian tribes, and they had this view. There was this All-Father that was a kind of immaterial being. They had names for him, like Wanami is the one I remember the clearest, which means he, the eternal one, the undying, he who walks alone. And the one that really gave me a kind of nerve shock was he who made us with his thought. The idea that all of reality is one global mind, the mind of God, who's the identity of this mind. And in this mind, all these conglomerations of mind, you call them brains, connect, and a self is then instantiated within them separately or respectively, and then can start moving them around. This means, however, that reality is moved by an immaterial principle of self-causation. You are a part of a global self-excited circuitry, and you are participating in the creation of reality, in the emergence of reality from its primordial substrate of potential. You are generating potential. This is also being shown now by Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, showing that like all the brain activity really is quantum, and that your brain is actually able to be a quantum computer. And therefore, we can now explain how thoughts can actually extend into a superposition, and you then have to collapse that superposition into a particular choice of action, and then you instantiate that into the world. However, you must generate this range of potential. Of course, your brain, you're using the brain as a computer with which to do it. However, you're typing into the computer what it should do, and you're selecting which words to type into it. You are the one generating the programming, in a sense, or at least innovating it. So the primordial, most natural religions of humankind were monotheistic. They were mentally based. They were based in a spiritual conception of reality in which we participated. And then, as societies get more wealthy, more materialistically well-standing, they start to move into polytheistic ideation. And this is then where you find the Greeks, the Sumerians, all these earliest historical cultures who were already polytheistic. But if you go into archaeological cultures, before history really became a thing in the Middle East or the ancient Near East, they were predominantly monotheistic. I think things started to go wrong with polytheism. That's really where we swerved off track, and we need to get back to the original worship of ultimate reality, of the Sky Father. So reality used to be, man's view of reality used to be more panpsychistic. Everything in reality is conscious, has a soul, and we are, in a sense, engaging with that. We're engaging with the soul of reality, with the mind of reality. And there is an identity to this mind. It's not just an impersonal mind like Brahman, according to the Hinduistic philosophy, at least the Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual school of thought, which states that this Brahman, a God, infinite consciousness, is completely impersonal. However, this runs into some philosophical, some cosmological contradictions and so forth it's just not sufficient, I'm afraid. It's not completely wrong. It's much closer than much else, but it still leaves something to be desired, I must say. However, that was not my point, and I don't want to denigrate any potential Hindu listeners. I respect Advaita Vedanta very much, and I was very interested when I was 16. I really found it very useful and helpful, and it really inspired me. So again, I'm just saying that there is still something missing there, I think. And of course, the same with Christianity, the same with Judaism, and all these more classically monotheistic Abrahamic religions. I'm not saying that they all, like, we must take them and combine them into a more unified concept of God, because I think they all are touching some of the right points. They're all contributing with valuable information. And there's really only one kind of religion in the world that's completely wrong, and it's the religion of atheism. That reality has no identity. That's why atheists can never explain anything, right? They never have an explanation for why anything is like it is, because they can just say, well, we'll just find out. It's just random causation or something like that, which is an oxymoron, because there is no random causation. If something doesn't have a reason for happening, it will not happen. Why should it happen? If there is nothing that makes, if there is nothing that happens to this bottle of water, that nothing will happen to the water. Like holy shit, how can you actually believe these kinds of things? And I've always had this problem with this idea that, like, well, the Big Bang just happened, and it's an oxymoron. It didn't just happen. It happened for a reason. It happened as a divine self-identification event, as I've heard Langen describe it. And I think that's the most sophisticated description thereof. So how do we get back to nature? What is really wrong here? Because you can also touch on some more quotidian or trivial points about, how to, like, well, first of all, let me give you some practical advice. Start exercising. Really important. It might kind of seem to be coming out of the blue, but really start exercising. That's very important. You need to exercise. You need to fall in love with reality. I once wrote this thing down, and of course now my phone is there, so I can't. I think it was the experience of beauty is the psychic manifestation of reality falling in love with itself. So seek beauty. Beauty is really reality. You falling in love with reality, which is in a sense God. It's God falling in love with himself. And that is really what we would like. We would like for reality to love itself. If you love reality, reality will love you. So therefore you must engage with your activities, with the things that give you meaning in your life. You must nourish your body, take care of it. You have it for a reason. You may not like all things about it. Well, you can fix a few things, like cosmetically, if you but still, like take care of your body, make it sure that it works, that it's healthy, that it works fine, and really engage with your interests. We all have different things that we love to do. Like take John Keats, who was an amazing poet. He loved nature. He loved writing about. He loved portraying nature in poems and displaying the beauty of reality onto all potential readers. And that was what he loved to do. He did that. And a carpenter who loves to see like a good log cabin, like do that. Like that's reality innovating itself, using cognition with which a mind or a self can then procreate new forms of reality. That's what reality likes. Reality likes to innovate. As I once heard Terence McKenna say, nature abhors habit. She loves innovation. She always wants something new. She doesn't like habit, repetition. Like we must always take those repetitions and then make new forms out of them. We must combine them, and so forth and so on. Reality is all about completing itself or generating new forms of itself. And it's working towards something, and you can partake in that process. You must rise all the way to the top. You are a metaphysical entity that will see many forms of reality throughout many different lives. You may think that you just belong to this body right now and here. That's not true, because you could easily just pick apart the body and you will still be you. You cannot break the self by breaking the body. And if you don't believe me, well, you'll have to find out for yourself and come to this realization that your body, that your self is a metaphysically irreducible entity that cannot be broken. you can feel this deep down inside if you really, you have to meditate on it without sounding too you know, like, but really, yeah, meditate on that and come to the core of who you really are. You can feel it if you really dare to, but you must dare. Like most people don't. They don't want to feel who they really are because they don't really like reality. You must love reality. You must fall in love with it. You must always pursue the highest self-expression that you can. And it involves many things, but it involves engagement with nature. So moving perhaps to some more countryside located abode would be helpful, I think, as well, if you have the economic means with which to do it. I unfortunately don't. If I did, I would do it because I would like to get back to nature, not in a way where I'll sit like a stone man and just like bang stones together and see if it makes fire. Like you can still take technology with you. I'm not against technology. I'm against a technomania, like an obsession with technology, an obsession with fake reality, with human-made reality, and replacing it with nature-made reality, with true reality. All right, so just to sum it all up, you must love reality. You must be reality. You are reality. You must always interact with it. Reality is not a dead machine. It's a living being. It has a soul, and you can interact with that, and it can show you things. You must always be prepared for when reality is ready to show you something. Reality is always gauging you if you keep in touch with it, and it'll move with you if you move with it, and it'll push you, it'll nudge you in the right direction if you want to go there, and if you ask God to show you where that might lead. It's an adventure, and it's a spiritual adventure that you must on which you must embark in order to truly become who you really are, which is God. And if you do this correctly, I don't know when, but because I'm, again, just a mere mortal, or at least in a mortal coil, an immortal soul in a mortal coil, having a human experience. But at some point, God will resorb you. You will become one with God. And you may have to work very hard. And it's not everyone who would like to have a relationship with God. And some people will say, well, I would like to know God. But I don't really think they would. Because it would tear them apart. Because knowing God is not as you might think it is. It's hard. It's tough. It's painful. It's never easy. Yeah, it's a real challenge. Reality is a challenge, and if you're up for it, trust me, you will win the million. But you must choose the million and not the 1,000 in the next box. If you know the Newcomb's paradox analogy I heard Langen use in an interview, and that's a great metaphor of reality. Like that's a great way of describing your situation. You have two boxes. You walk in. You know that there's this demon who has predicted your move. If you can see that there's one box where there's just $1,000, yeah. And you are now told that if the demon has predicted that you will only take the opaque box with allegedly $1 million, there will be $1 million. But if you'll take both, if the demon predicted so, there will only be 1,000. And there will be no money in the opaque box. So what do? You trust the demon because you know that it has never been wrong before. So you trust it and you take the million, and only the million. That is the bet that reality has made with you. Like you can have eternal life, but you must be really to be willing to take it and to work for it. And it's not just something that will fall into your lap merely by having faith alone. Faith alone does not work. It requires action, requires works. But of course, works is just a manifestation of having faith. That's having faith in God will manifest as a particular choice of action. If you derail from that, or you will then show you that you don't have faith in God, that you don't have faith in reality, and therefore reality cannot work with you. Reality would like to work with you because reality is all about making itself greater, and you can partake in that. You can make reality great again without having that sound too much. Well, take it or leave it. This was my little rant. It just felt like it's getting back to nature. I could have touched more on that specifically, maybe for another video in the future. But at least for so far, have a good time. I hope you do well, and I hope you come to find God. That's what we're all trying to do, I hope. Yeah. Thank you for listening, and yeah, Leslie out.